Hey fellas, let the sauce begin. First, I need to add a couple of clips I forgot to add to the Step 7 video. I added a small additional piece above the windshield and did a quick test fit of the roof. Part 8 of the Miniart GAZ AAA cargo truck model build is a crucial stage that focuses on the constructing of the rear cargo bed and box, as well as initiating the weathering process. The primary goal of this part is to accurately assemble the cargo bed and box, ensuring precise alignment and secure attachment. The cargo bed is an essential component of the truck, providing ample space for transporting goods, supplies, or military equipment. Attention to detail is crucial during this phase, as it involves meticulous placement of various parts, such as side panels, support beams, and the cargo box itself. Additionally, this part marks the beginning of the weathering process, which aims to replicate the effects of wear and tear on the model truck. Weathering techniques, such as applying subtle paint chipping, rust effects, and dirt accumulation, bring a sense of realism and authenticity to the model, capturing the truck's history and the environment in which it operated. The careful execution of both the cargo bed construction and the initial stages of weathering in Part 8 contribute to the overall accuracy and visual impact of the Miniart GAZ AAA cargo truck project I'm working on here. These small pieces are for the mounting of the spare tires. I ended up having to sand these down later though, because the thickness of these and the wheels glued to them interfered with the fit of the cargo box and the chassis. It was just too thick, and so you might want to just be aware of that when you go to do this. It's also quite curious that there's no real mechanism for securing the wheels to these, like a nut and a threaded bolt of some sort. So I'm not sure how the real vehicle had these tires mounted so that they wouldn't move. It's good enough for this model, I guess. So here I am, I'm just placing these things where there's little raised indications of where they're to be placed. There was a little bit of flash on these parts, but they cleaned up nicely. The next step in assembling this cargo box is for you to glue the big cross pieces beneath the cargo bed section. However, I deviated from the actual build sequence shown in the instruction sheet because I felt that because the cargo box paint would be a different color than the black of the frame, I wanted to have all the cross beams assembled on the underside of the deck part CD1. According to the specifications, you should have a central beam CA4 mounted to the metal chassis frame and the other three on the truck bed section. This caused me some trouble later on because of the fit of the grooves on part CA4 was wider than when I went to glue the box in place. It would have been better if I had followed the instructions and just painted CA4 the same color as the box, but it's a bit of a conundrum really. I had some difficulty getting it to sit properly, but in the end I was able to make it fit and look fairly decent. There were a few tense moments when I felt that I might end up letting you all down, because it might have been a catastrophe. However, I just calmed myself and took my time and was able to bring it to a successful conclusion. This here is a little storage section underneath the cargo bed that you have to build, and it's just a straightforward thing, although I may have mistakenly glued CA3 upside down, it looks like, and you just have to be aware that there's these two little cutouts that need to be able to sit on top of the chassis. I ended up having to come in with a X-Acto knife and cut my own little slots later. It was a bit of a head scratching moment, but I can see here in this video that I actually glued part CA3 upside down, so just be careful when you go to build yours. Cleanup was fairly straightforward with these parts. Here I'm using one of my homemade little sanding sticks I make with whatever grit I want. Okay, now I'm getting excited and I just wanted to have a look and see how this is all going to look together. Yeah, like I say, I ended up causing myself a bit of a problem by gluing that one part upside down. CA4 has got these two little grooves and where it's supposed to sit with the chassis, and the chassis wasn't wide enough by, very small amount, but enough to not allow a really nice fit. But I ended up making it work, and now I'm moving on to doing the side panels. Yeah, just another quick little test fit, and here I'm just checking out the doors, seeing how they look. And they fit pretty nicely. So my initial process is to prime this out with some brown Mr. Surfacer, thinned down quite a bit so that it flows nicely over the surface and isn't pebbly. So after that part is done, I'm going to just throw in some, I believe it was deck tan, and there was still a little bit of that brown in there. This airbrush's cup, so it was a medium sort of color there. After what was in the paint cup was sprayed out, I added some more deck tan, which gave me an even lighter tone that I kind of sprayed in the middle of the areas. And this would give me sort of old aged wood look. And on top of that, I'll be spraying some hairspray. And then on top of that, there's going to be a green color, which is going to be slightly lighter than the green that I had on for the rest of the body. You can see here that I'm starting to work with the figures. I wanted to have a driver for this thing, but unfortunately, I really didn't plan for this very well, and well, lesson learned. Here you can see that I'm having some real trouble getting this guy to sit on the chair. And I should have left the back wall off, and perhaps the steering wheel and the other breakable items like the gear shift and stuff like that, because in the end I basically had to abandon the idea of having a driver in here, and that's fine. It's not a big deal. So because I had all these extra resin wheels that I've made, I thought it would be a good idea to use one of those as opposed to one of the really nice kit ones with the better detail perhaps, but just got to be careful where that pour stub looks out, that's all, because if it's showing on the side, that won't be good. Anyways, I'm going to have to paint those all up after I clean them, and we'll just glue them in place with some CA glue. But again, this is where I ended up having some fit issues because of the thickness of the tire. It wouldn't allow the bed to come flat up against the chassis. So I ended up having to go back in there and scrape back some of that plastic so that it would fit. So the next part is these little hooks that are for securing loads, I guess, with rope or whatever. And yeah, if I'd had done this differently, I would have waited till the very end, because in handling, they are very fragile, and I broke one or two of them off. So yeah, learning from my mistakes, I would suggest you put them on near the end of the build before once you have the box secured onto the chassis, because they are fragile. And there are like little spots indicated where they're meant to be glued. So I figured before I go to put the hairspray on, I would paint some of these metal parts up with a rust base color, just so maybe I can come back later and indicate a little bit of paint chipping and a little bit of rust that has started to grow on these parts here. Okay, next up is the hairspray, which I've decanted from the spray can, and now I put it into my airbrush and applying it. You know, it's always a bit of a gamble and a crapshoot as to how it's all going to work out in the end. For the most part, I ended up having success. But in the central area of the bed where I wanted most of the wear to show, I actually didn't have too much success with the actual hairspray coming away after I sprayed this green onto it. So yeah, that's what's going on here. Is after the hairspray is dry, I came back in with some Tamiya paint, and I don't use lacquer thinner or lacquer paints or enamel paints when I do my chipping, because the logic of this whole process is that the hairspray, which is a water-based product, is a bit of a resist, or something that the green paint can sit on top of. And then when you go to add water, like I'm doing here, the water reactivates the hairspray that's underneath that green paint. And then the green paint has nothing to hold on to any longer. And so it comes away, like you can see here. But if I were to use things like lacquer or enamel paints, you might be able to get chipping, but it's very difficult. And I find that for me, I need to thin my Tamiya paint with just water when I go to do my hairspray chipping. And I find I have way more control over how much I want to take off. But yeah, it's a bit of luck as to how everything comes out, you know. You think you've got enough hairspray, but in the end, maybe I didn't. So, yeah, my job as a scenic artist, scenic painter in the film industry has given me a lot of experience working with a lot of these different materials. And for things like crackling and whatnot, you know, you can't have a really strong bond with whatever the effect you're going for is, because if you do, it's not going to react the way you want it to. Like, you don't want to be using some of the other acrylic paints out there, because they have sort of an acrylic plasticky surface that won't break apart. It's just like an elastic band, and when it shrinks, like for a crackle effect, it's not going to shrink. And for this hairspray technique, if you go to use like Vallejo or AK or whatever, they have a different carrier that is a bit plasticky, and whereas Tamiya, it's able to sort of like break away very nicely and finely. I mean, I see other modelers who swear, oh, you can do it with lacquer paint, and but it doesn't work for me anyway. I mean, maybe they like it and it's good, but I think you can get a far more subtle effect by using a water-based paint like Tamiya, and just using water as a thinner, so that when you come back in there with the water, it can come through it and reactivate the hairspray. This here is showing where, because I wasn't having any success, because I guess I didn't have enough hairspray down here, I grabbed a little bit of Windex, and I used some water to dilute it so I could control it, and I was able to remove some of the Tamiya paint that way, as opposed to the chipping. And in the end, I think it looks pretty good. So when I'm going about removing the green paint, I'm trying to think about logically, where would there be contact? Where would there be wear? It's not just going to be as effective if you just go in there and just remove it from every place or somewhere where it doesn't really make sense. So that's why I'm kind of concentrating on the edges, and on the back end of the cargo bed, where things would be loaded on more than in the front, for example. Okay, now we're going to get into some pigment work, and what I'm doing here is just giving it a initial light base of pigment. I'm not going too heavy, because I'm not going to have like a vehicle that's been tramping through mud or anything. It's just going to be, a truck that's been on the road for a while, a dusty truck with maybe a bit of accumulation here and there, but nothing too extreme. So I'm using a Tamiya thinner to make sure that the pigment stays in place afterwards. And I actually take advantage of it being wet in those areas to add a little bit more until I've reached a point where I'm happy with how it looks. So here I'm painting up another one of my spare tires, and I'm using AK acrylics here. I really like them for painting, brush painting that is. I don't usually spray them. I either use lacquer based paint, or I'll add Mr. Thinner to my Tamiya paints. Like when I went to paint the gray undercolor before I did the hairspray, I forgot to mention that, yeah, I thinned that paint with a lacquer thinner so that it would bite into the plastic somewhat, because you don't want that coming away when you go to do your hairspray technique. Anyways, here I am. I'm using a little CA glue to mount these wheels. So of course, now that they're mounted, I have to sort of bring them to the same level as what's already on the underside of that cargo bed. And you know, it's not really a strict process. You can drip it on like this and then come back in, and you can use your brush to sort of like smooth it out and move it around. And because like I say, I don't really want it necessarily to look like mud accumulation or anything. It's more of a dusty look is what I'm going for here. So here are some of the other smaller parts that are going to be coming up. These are little retainers that are supposed to hold the side panels on the front where the engine bay is, louvered panels, and I didn't get it right how they are supposed to go. So, and here's some of the photo etch. They've got these little tiny handles and stuff like that for those panels, and these corner pieces are for the cargo bed, the side panels on the corners. So here now I'm getting into putting some pigment on the tires, and this technique has been around since the early 90s, I guess, is when MIG kind of brought it onto the scene. And now it's sort of a standard practice where you apply the pigment on a fully painted tire, and you can come back in and remove as much as you want of that pigment, and you know, whatever you don't remove is left in the recesses and in the lower areas. So it's a pretty effective way of getting an aged look on the tires. I'm going to be coming back in later with another layer of Tamiya buff that I thinned down heavily with water, and I put that on top of this stuff too, because it really gets into the grooves of the tire treads, and you know, gives another layer of dust and accumulated dirt and whatnot. So initially I'm just using my fingertips to remove any of the excess, and then I'm coming in with a brush to sort of like even out the distribution of the pigment, and I'll come back in later with a little bit of water on a damp piece of material, and take away a fair amount of what I've put on there, because I really don't want it to be too heavy. I want to be able to see some of the black of the tire. And I actually come in with some Q-tips after, with a little bit of moisture on it to clean it up more precisely. And But here you can see I'm getting into pigmenting the underside of the chassis. Like I want to take care of this before I glue the actual cargo box in place, because I need to get from underneath here and then also from the top and from the side, and to have the cargo box in place, it would just make that more difficult. So like I say, I like building in sub-assemblies. I find it a far more exacting way to make sure that you're applying your techniques in a manner that is consistent with reality. So yeah, here you can see the front tire is getting some work done to it, and I used one of my wife's facial pads, and maybe that wasn't such a good idea because it was leaving little hairs. So maybe use like a microfiber rag of some sort instead. You can see how it's breaking down there, but not a big deal. Just come back in with the finger and clean it up. So here I'm just coming back in with a little bit more of the pigment built up like on the center areas of the wheels, just to maybe come back later and have a spot to put some grease leaks from the bearings, or it's just maybe good to have a little bit more of a build up in the center, because centrifugal force isn't so strong there, and you might get an accumulation. Here I'm just knocking off the excess before I add some Tamiya thinner to hold it all in place. Okay, fellas, it looks like we're coming to the end of this episode, chapter 8, or part 8, and there's still more to come, which I guess will be carried on in the next episode. So, in the meantime, and in between time, and that's another edition of the GAZ AAA cargo truck build. So hopefully you enjoyed it, and maybe you'll consider subscribing and liking and all that stuff that people seem to say on their YouTube videos. You know, this is kind of new to me, although, you know, I did have a channel before, about 13 years ago, and I used to put up some building ideas and processes such as this, but I'm a little bit more experienced now, and the equipment is a little bit better, and but I'm still learning the ropes of all of this stuff, and thankfully I've got a bit of time to kind of dig in, and hopefully these videos will get a little bit better as time goes by. So, take care, and we'll see you on the next episode. Cheerio.